He once said, "I deny ever doping," but former cyclist Lance Armstrong has, for the first time, publicly admitted to using performance-enhancing drugs. What's next for Armstrong and cycling? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Rida Fakhri. Welcome to today's program. Lance Armstrong has ended years of speculation and fierce denial by admitting he used performance-enhancing drugs to win every single one of his 7 Tour de France titles. The former cyclist, who was stripped of his titles late last year, made the confession in an interview with US TV host Oprah Winfrey. Armstrong admitted covering up his use of drugs, but says there was a culture of doping among cyclists. Rob Reynolds has this report.
Lance Armstrong, in his own words, finally admitting he doped, cheated, and lied.
Did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
Armstrong admitted he used banned substances all 7 times he won the Tour de France and offered this explanation.
What was, for you, the flaw or flaws that made you willing to risk it all?
I think this just ruthless desire to win at all costs, truly.
Armstrong was stripped of his Tour de France titles and banned from the sport for life in October after a report by the U.S. anti-doping agency detailed how he masterminded one of the most sophisticated doping schemes in the history of professional sports. Armstrong denied doping allegations for a decade. Armstrong's popularity helped fuel a cycling boom in the U.S. Cyclists reacted to his admissions.
I still respect him as an athlete.
The message is, hey, you can cheat, lie, and get over.
I'm not that surprised.
Armstrong is far from the only professional cyclist who has engaged in doping, says one of the founders of modern drug testing in sports, Dr. Don Catlin.
We know that cycling has the largest problem among all sports. But it's not to say that there aren't others that are involved. They are techniques that lead to being a winner. People like to be winners.
Armstrong said he used testosterone, fresh blood transfusions, and a drug called EPO, originally developed to treat severe anemia.
EPO migrates to the bone marrow, where it turns on cells that make red cells. The red cells carry oxygen, and the oxygen is the fuel that drives the body.
Armstrong is already being sued by a fellow cyclist, and he could face criminal prosecution by the U.S. Justice Department on fraud charges. He could also be required to pay back some of the more than $30 million he and his team received from their sponsor, the U.S. Postal Service. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Los Angeles.
Armstrong's career has gone through extraordinary highs and lows. Here's a quick look at how he got to this point. Armstrong's professional career started with limited success back in the early 1990s. Then in 1996, at the age of 25, Armstrong was diagnosed with testicular cancer, but he overcame the illness in a spectacular fashion, winning the 1999 Tour de France. But it was just the beginning. Armstrong went on to win every year from 1999 to 2005, a 7-year winning streak that set a new Tour de France record. In 2005, just weeks after he'd announced he would retire, a French newspaper said it had evidence Armstrong was guilty of doping. The allegations subsided after Armstrong retired, but when he announced his intention to return in 2009, those allegations came back in force. In October 2012, the U.S. anti-doping agency said it had overwhelming evidence against Armstrong. He was stripped of all his Tour de France titles. So let's discuss all this with our guest. Joining us in London, Michelle Verrocken, Director of Sporting Integrity Limited, a consultancy on integrity matters, including doping in sports. Also in London, Marty McDonald, a former cycling team owner and manager. someone who's managed Tour de France level athletes. And in New York, Fred Dreyer, freelance journalist and former editor at Velo News Cycle magazine. Welcome to you all. Fred Dreyer, if I can start with you. After years of emphatically denying he took any kinds of drugs to win in cycling, finally Lance Armstrong says it, he did. Why make this very late public confession, though? What has he got to gain?
Well, I think he has two potential things to gain. I don't know if his admission is going to help him achieve that. He can possibly lessen his lifetime ban handed down by the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency for competition, and he might take steps towards, renewing his brand, towards fixing the brand that was so tarnished in the last months when all this came to light. Like I said, I don't really know if this interview is going to accomplish that. He didn't give up any real details on the infrastructure he used for his doping regimen, which might lessen the ban. And really, I don't know if public opinion is going to sway towards him. He appeared very shifty in his interview. I don't know if it's going to get him there.
Michelle Verrocken, is the interview going to get him there, at least when it comes to winning the sympathy of the U.S. public, a sympathy that he has largely lost? Is it enough for him to turn the page, or would most people have looked for more, both in substance and tone, in his admission?
Well, certainly all he's done really is confirm what the United States Anti-Doping Agency had already gathered by way of their reasoned decision they published to help strip him of the Tour de France titles. But as a tactic to be able to get some public sympathy, perhaps that's what he might do. But in terms of the sporting world, really, if he's going to come clean, he has to put that evidence on oath, and he has to talk to the anti-doping authorities and the sports organisation, maybe even the independent commission that has been set up by the UCI, and he has to name names. He really does have to come cleaner than he has. Marty
McDonald, do you accept that he has to come much cleaner than he has, naming names, going much further than what he said with Oprah Winfrey? Did he look genuine enough as well for you? Was he remorseful enough? Can he redeem himself with what he said?
I don't think he can redeem himself with what he said in the Oprah interview. I think he came clean and told us pretty much what we all knew from evidence in the past. So coming clean in that respect, yes, he's done that. But I think that this goes a lot deeper. Lance Armstrong didn't do this alone. Whenever he was asked to comment on anyone, he said, "I'm gonna lay down on that. I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to sit here and blame anybody." So I think from that respect, this is only the beginning of this, and I think there is an awful lot more that needs to come from Lance Armstrong here if he's to build his public image and ultimately achieve what he's trying to achieve from this admission.
Fred Dreyer, how much is the UCI to blame, the world governing body? Lance Armstrong was very careful not to go very far into giving any details as to what they did or didn't do, what they knew or didn't know. But many people suspect that some of these insiders knew for very long, or suspected at the very least, that some cyclists, including Lance Armstrong, were fooling the system, but decided to do nothing about it, simply to perpetuate this fairy tale story of a cancer victim turned hero, this myth that in many respects helped the sport of cycling win so many fans and followers.
I think it's been widely acknowledged that Lance Armstrong did not invent doping. Doping was present in cycling long before he got into it. And you can make I think there's the argument to be made that the UCI really turned a blind eye during that era and during Armstrong's era. The fact of the matter is that Armstrong was the first major American champion to win mainstream fame for cycling in the United States, and so he opened up a whole new market for cycling in the UCI. So I think they had a vested interest to not take him down during that era. I mean, there's been other allegations and reports out there that, Armstrong worked with the UCI to make positive tests go away. He denied that claim last night. You know, both Floyd Landis and Tyler Hamilton have discussed that there was a positive test at the 2001 Tour of Switzerland, that Armstrong made a sizable donation to the UCI to make that test go away. You know, Armstrong said that that was false. And, you know, really getting back to a previous point, I think Armstrong could take steps towards redeeming himself if he were to really discuss the relationship he had with the UCI during this era, to let us know whether there were conflicts of interest, whether the UCI was indeed looking the other way or helping him make these positive tests go away. But you know,
does
if
the
he
admission,
doesn't
though,
do
prove
that
the UCI in any way was complicit in his doping?
That's an interesting question. I think to cycling insiders, yes, it's enough information. To the general public, to the court of public opinion, you know, to an independent panel, I don't know if it goes there, if it goes far enough. But yeah, to cycling insiders, I think it's widely acknowledged that, you know, the UCI was not doing its job during this era.
Michelle Verrocken, you've been involved in anti-doping for very many years. Lance Armstrong said in the interview that using these performance-enhancing drugs was virtually like pumping up his tires, putting water in his bottles, simply saying that everyone else did it, that it was a level playing field, that he didn't have any unfair advantage over anyone else. Was that the case? And does it make it any more acceptable or justifiable?
Well, I don't agree. I think the rules are quite clear. The prohibited substances were listed. And yes, we do have some limitations within the testing program because we had difficulty initially with a detection method that we could absolutely rely on for blood doping, for the use of erythropoietin, which was to increase the number of red blood cells. We've even had debate over the acceptable level of testosterone in the body, but that does not excuse somebody for trying to take those kind of shortcuts to actually exploit the areas of the rules where we are struggling in some respects to be able to make sure that we've nailed everything down. So I just don't agree with him. And if he's saying everybody was doing it, then by all means, you bring forward the evidence that everybody was doing it, because you're now damaging the reputation of so many other people around you. Some have been caught, some certainly still have drug-free records at this point in time. So what are you doing here? You have to either name names or accept that you were wrong in what you were doing.
Marty McDonald, what about the job of people whose very responsibility should have been to make sure that cyclists didn't fool the system, that cheats were caught when they were taking these types of banned substances and drugs? A lot of people from within the industry obviously knew what was going on. How much are they to blame for not doing enough?
I think I don't think enough was done at the time. I think there was a cloud of suspicion that was always there, and I think at the time there was this code, this silence, this omerta that they talk about, and that ultimately should have been broken. And we go all the way back to the Festina case in '98, and we thought then that we'd turned a corner, and we kept turning a corner as scandal after scandal, to the point where Lance Armstrong really was the one that got away. And now that's changed. He's admitted the lies. He's admitted that he cheated all the way through his 7 Tour de France victories. So there had to be people in that knew what was going on and did turn a blind eye. And the question of the donation to the UCI that Armstrong in his interview with Oprah Winfrey said they requested for him. Someone came to him and said, we're poor, we need some money, would you donate some money? And I think that was a very, very naive move on their part to accept money from someone that had that tarnished reputation. I suppose that cloud of suspicion that always hanged over his head, although he had denied it categorically time and time again from his first Tour de France victory.
Fred Rye, a lot of people, as we say, speaking now against Lance Armstrong, speaking out against him in the last few months. Where were they, though, all these years when he was winning title after title after title? Why did they keep so silent? And why did it take so long for the rules to change, for proper testing procedures, out-of-competition testing procedures to be put in place?
Well, I mean, on the journalist side, I think people wanted to believe Lance Armstrong's story. I think he was a very strong personality. I mean, he was a bully. He admitted it last night, so he was very good at coercing people into going along with his story. Bonnie Ford from ESPN wrote a great column today talking about a very nasty, angry phone call she got from Armstrong after writing a column in 2009 during his comeback. I want to return to the level playing field question really quickly and say that people should really read Tyler Hamilton's book. He really does a great job at shooting down that myth and showing that drug use was all about techniques, and showing that if you worked with the best doctors and had the best techniques, which Armstrong did, you were light years ahead of guys who were maybe just using drugs on their own. So it really shows that, yeah, you could say that they were all using it, but there's a certain amount of knowledge that goes into using drugs that makes them quite a bit more effective than if you're not working with the right people.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of interest that's been generated in this story. Let's get some reaction now for you from Facebook. Hannah James asks, why did it take 7 years for it to become known? You have to question the reliability, she says, of the testing procedures. Jerry Nathalang says, makes you think about the people who provided Lance with the technology to cheat. And Ruben Dario Martinez says simply, he's human, no better or worse than the rest of us. Michelle Verrocken, a lot of different attitudes there to what is going on, but essentially was the writing on the wall to do well at this high level of professional cycling? Did you have to dope?
Well, obviously the type of events that he was engaged with are very, very physically challenging. And if we've reached the limit of human performance, then certainly there is a huge responsibility there on the sports governing bodies. You know, this isn't meant to be a gladiator type festival to the death. We should actually be looking at the type of sport we are providing. But I think the issue is, of course, there are rules there, and part of taking part in sport is playing by those rules. Yes, there were challenges in the early days of the testing program. The majority of the samples that we were collecting were always dealt with anonymously. It's only when we started to link up samples week after week with individuals, we could actually start to profile against an athlete and understand the changes that their body was going through in terms of the extreme performances they were giving, as well as understanding for ourselves the levels of some of these hormone drugs in the body. So, you know, it's been an evolving thing. Anti-doping science is actually quite young in its development, but it's also the responsibility that we share it with the sport, and we share it with the people who are watching. It's what do they really want? Do they want people to compete to the death?
No doubt it is a grueling profession, professional cycling. Marty McDonald, someone who has first-hand knowledge of what it takes to win at this level, Tour de France athletes, and you've known a few of them. How much of this culture of doping existed back then in the days of Lance Armstrong winning and being at the top of the game? How much of it still exists today, with winning being valued apparently above all else, not to mention the amount of money that is involved in this?
Cycling as a sport is a different sport. You could see that with the Tour de France last year, that the cycling has come a very, very long way since the Lance Armstrong era, because you're looking back to 1999 up until Lance Armstrong's last Tour de France victory. And as Michelle just said there, you know, anti-doping has moved on. The introduction of the biological passport enabled to profile the urine and blood samples of riders in terms of the drug testing. So cycling as a sport has moved on, and you can see that. You can see that with the young riders coming through. You can see that with the age as well of a lot of the new stars of cycling coming through. You're not a world champion at under 23 level, and then you turn professional and disappear for 5 years plus until you decide to go over to the dark side. The sport of cycling has changed. You can see the culture of it, not just in terms of the openness of riders, the omerta, the silence, how it was something that was never talked about. It was something that the suspicion was there, but it was something that didn't get talked about. Cycling as a sport has moved on. You can look to riders such as Bradley Wiggins and his victory in the Tour de France last year, and the victory of Cadel Evans the year before. It's very, very different now, the Tour de France, because if you look at the way the race is ridden, especially in the mountains, you don't get the riders sprinting up the mountains day after day after day after day. Riders have bad days, and as Michelle said as well, it's not that kind of gladiatorial pushing it to the death. So cycling as a sport has moved on. All the teams have their anti-doping measures in place. They're so much more open.
Fred Dwyer, how much damage, though, has Armstrong done to cycling, and where can he personally hope to go from here?
Yeah, he's done a significant amount of damage to cycling. I mean, cycling is crawling out of this horrible era, but unfortunately it's still being hurt by its past. I mean, Nissan has left as a sponsor. There's a long list of sponsors that have left cycling behind in the wake of Armstrong's admission. But I think he's also done a bit of damage to himself. This isn't just a story about a guy who used drugs. This is a story about a guy who was pursued by people who alleged that he had used drugs and knew he had used drugs, and he spent 15 years attacking them publicly, harshly. And in doing so, he made people's lives a living hell. Greg LeMond, former Tour winner, Frankie and Betsy Andreu, and to think that he is going to be able to progress from that with 2-hour interview on Oprah, I think that's a little naive on his end. So back to your original question, yeah, I think for all the good that cycling has done, this Armstrong admission, it's going to hurt it, especially in a financial end.
Well, he did suggest what he might like to do. Michelle Verrocken, is there any place, though, for Armstrong in any future anti-doping campaign? Should people who have confessed to cheating be allowed back into the sport? He said if there was to be at any point a Truth and Reconciliation conference, he'd be the first man in the door. Would people want him in, though?
Well, I'm sure people will want Lance Armstrong to appear before a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, as he offered to do in his own interview with Oprah, that I think that way we might find a little bit more of the truth behind what we've heard so far. But I'm really disappointed with this new breed of confessed dopers that people are holding up as if they're good role models, and saying that yes, we need to learn from them, and now we have to continue to work with them, because people are profiting by their cheating, by their misdemeanors, and we're overlooking those athletes who've worked long and hard all career long to remain drug-free, and they're not getting their voice on these committees or whatever. So we should be listening to those athletes and understand why it is that athletes like Nicole Cook or Bradley Wiggins, why they've been able to say no. Why is it that he had to say yes? And that's the difference. I don't think we should give these people the oxygen of publicity and allow them to write books and profit by it.
Marty McDonald, should they be allowed back into the sport if they redeem themselves, or would it encourage too many people to cheat, confess, obviously cheat, win, confess, and try to reinvent themselves?
If you're talking on the case of Lance Armstrong, I think, what career does he want from here? I think in terms of sanctions for doping, I think that has to again go back and become a lot stricter, and there are countries where doping is now a criminal offence. Maybe that's the route that we have to go down, but I hope that the days of someone doping, going away, serving a short ban and coming back are gone. I think we do need to increase the shortest term of the ban, to not let them come in. But I do want to touch there on what Michelle just said about people profiting from the whistleblowing and the books that they're writing. And there's the news today that Johan Brunel's writing a book, and Tyler Hamilton's book. And Nicole Cook had made a very, very good point this week, Olympic champion, saying that people such as Tyler Hamilton will make more from their whistleblowing books than she's made in her entire career. And this is someone that has changed the face of cycling for women from 12 years old, winning world titles and Olympic titles. For me, I'd like to see them stand up and say, hey, I cheated.
Obviously, much to talk about. The debate only just beginning. I do want to thank all my guests, though, for their perspectives and for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Michelle Verrockin and Marty McDonald in London, thank you both very much. And in New York, Fred Dreyer. Thank you. And thanks to all our guests, as always, for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Send us your feedback. Let us know what you think of today's discussion. You can also, of course, send us feedback on facebook.com/Al Jazeera. I'm Rita Fakhri. Thanks for watching.